The Princess Who Wasn't by Templeton Moss. Once upon a time there were 5 kingdoms. 4 of them were very famous and popular and beloved and made a lot of money from tourism every year. But the 5th was small and poor and never had any tourists. The king and his advisors sat down to figure out what the other kingdoms had that theirs didn't. "Princesses," said Larry, the king's chief advisor. "Snow White, Cinderella, Rapunzel, and Sleeping Beauty live in those other kingdoms. Everyone likes princesses. We don't have a princess." "How do we get a princess?" asked the king. His advisors explained briefly the typical process for something like this, but the king decided that this would take too long, and he said they should just hire one instead. Scouts were sent throughout the kingdom to find the most beautiful girls in the land. The king and his advisors had put together a list of traits necessary to be a princess, and beautiful was at the top of the list. Of course, when the young ladies of the kingdom heard about the search for a princess, they all wanted to be chosen. They put on their nicest clothes, did their makeup and their hair just right, and walked around the kingdom posing and trying to look as princessly as possible. Yes, it seemed every girl in the kingdom wanted to be a princess. Except Kathy. Kathy was a sheep herder. She had inherited the sheep farm from her father and couldn't afford to hire help, so she ran it by herself. It was a lot of work, but she enjoyed it. She loved her sheep and she loved her life, and she didn't want it to change. Unfortunately for her, it was about to change, because, unluckily, Kathy was the most beautiful girl in the village and was chosen by the king's men to come to the castle to try out for the job of princess. 4 other girls were chosen, and the 5 of them were cleaned up, dressed up, brought before the king and his advisors, and asked a lot of questions. What would be your first act as a princess? What does being a princess mean to you? Why do you want to become a princess? "I don't," said Kathy when it was her turn. She had not been given the option of not participating. She'd been unable to stop the handmaidens from dressing her up in a fancy dress that was so tight around the waist she could barely breathe in it. But she wasn't going to lie. "What?" exclaimed the king. "I thought every girl wanted to be a princess." "Well, I don't. I want to be a sheep herder, which is what I am. I don't like fancy dresses and makeup and high heels and jewellery. And by the way, why are those the things that make a princess anyway? Who's to say a princess can't be someone who likes to work with animals, or wears casual clothes, or is it necessarily this skinny? Who decided that a princess has to be pretty and elegant and not do anything except marry a prince or go to a ball?" So saying, Kathy walked away, changed out of the dress they'd put her in, and returned home to her sheep. The next day, while Kathy was tending her flock, a voice behind her called her name. It was, oddly enough, the king. "What brings you here, sire?" asked Kathy. "I was up all night thinking about what you said," the king told her, "and I think you're right. It wasn't fair for me to single you and those other girls out just because of the way you look. I think maybe a princess can be whatever she wants. So, I want you to have this." The king held up a tiara, the official headgear of princesses. "I appreciate that, Your Majesty, but I don't want to be a princess." "That's just it. You're not the princess. You're a princess. I hereby appoint you Princess of Sheep." He placed the tiara on Kathy's astonished head. "And she," he added, pointing at a milkmaid across the road who was also wearing a tiara, "is Princess of Milk. And over there," he pointed at another girl in a tiara, "is Princess of Chocolate Chip Cookies. And there's also a Princess of Basketball, and a Princess of Crocheting, and a Princess of Juggling." Yes, and from then on, every girl in the kingdom was a princess. Tall, short, thin, fat, pretty, and, well, let's just say pretty in a different way than the others. They were each princesses of whatever they were best at. And of course, with all those princesses, the kingdom became a booming tourist attraction. And Kathy, the Princess of Sheep, lived very happily ever after. The end. Thank you for reading with Storyberries.com. Free stories for kids.